I've been doing this for 20 years on offsite construction, and this is probably the most substantive meeting I've ever been at regarding this subject. So I want to thank Abby Ivory and the group. Could you all stand up and wave your hand, Ivory Innovations, please? Really good. I mean, finance, regulatory, they hit all the contextual issues that are really challenging this industry, but also addressing the opportunities. Today, in this last panel, we have some STEAM people here. I'd like them to introduce themselves. We have Mary Tingerthal from Construction Revolution, and Cindy Davis from Commonwealth of Virginia, and Blake Thomas from Salt Lake City, and Dan Hardcastle from HUD. They're each going to introduce themselves, but under the auspice, in about, if you would, take a few minutes to tell us your story. The theme of this session is pilots. There are a lot of municipalities that are out in the audience. I met quite a few of you, and you're wondering, what's the next step, perhaps? How do I get into this? How do I take the next step to try this out, try out offsite construction for housing? And so we're going to hear some stories about what each of these folks are doing. You've heard from some of them, but allow them to go into a little more detail about, in particular, what are the things that worked, and what are the things they would have done differently, and where are they kind of going into the future. So they're each going to take that opportunity, and then we're going to open it up just for the audience to ask burning questions that you've had during the day that you maybe can ask some folks that have been through the fire, and say, if we want to try to get into this, how do we do that? So we have, in order of what I would call evolving offsite contexts or ecologies, Salt Lake City, who has just implemented a policy and now is looking at a state. We're going to go there. We have an evolving region, which is Minnesota, that is probably a few years down the line from where Utah is currently. And then Cindy Davis in Virginia, that's been doing this for a couple of decades, and we'll share their experience as well. So let's go in that order, and then after that, invite Dan Hardcastle to follow up on his comments and thoughts about what he's seeing nationally and what these folks have presented. So please go ahead.
Sure. Blake Thomas with Salt Lake City. I'm grateful to be here. Appreciate the Ivory Innovation Group and the opportunity to talk to all of you, and for your endurance being here for the last panel. A quick bit about me. I was appointed as the Director of Community and Neighborhoods at Salt Lake City in 2020. My career has been in government, working in politics, starting in the governor's office and then moving to Salt Lake County and now Salt Lake City. So have hit each governmental entity and love being on the front lines of building and community involvement. I apologize that I'm not a technical folk like some of the people on this stage. I'm not even a pretty face. So I just want to set the bar low at the beginning and get those expectations right. But I do have the good fortune of working for Mayor Mendenhall, who is a very innovative mayor, who's very visionary, who pushed us to be the first municipality in the country to adopt ICC MBI standards 1200 and 1205 in the country. I'll talk more about that later, but that's something we're really proud of. So whether it's offsite construction, mass timber, unlocking housing supply through our land use ordinances and zoning changes, we always try to be as forward-thinking as we can and help alleviate the shortage which we have right now. In our department is the Building Services Division, where the chief building official is housed. We also have the planning and zoning team, as well as transportation, housing, that passes through all of our HUD dollars to members of the community and nonprofits. And lastly, we have our youth and family services team doing after school and adult learning programs. And lastly, all the real estate functions at the city. So that's our team, that's our department. If I could kick it off with one fun fact that we're proud of, we had a record-setting year in 2020 where we had $1.2 billion of construction valuation and permits that we issued. So that wasn't our pipeline, but actual permits issued. We were proud of that. And then in 2021, we broke the record of 1.4 billion with $2.8 billion of construction valuation of permits issued, broke the 2 billion mark again last year and are on that track again this year. We're seeing a slight dip with some of the broader market forces and rates that are playing into our community as well as nationally, but something that we're proud of, and we complemented that by reducing our permit issuance time by 63% since 2016. So that's a bit about our department. I'm excited to talk more specifics later. Thanks.
Please go ahead, Mary.
All right, good to see you all again. So good to see so many of you still here. So thank you for doing that. I talked a little bit about my connection to modular earlier, but let me talk about my connection to housing a little more thoroughly. I have worked in the field of affordable housing finance for a very long career. I've worked in the public sector, both at the state and at the local level. I've worked for nonprofit organizations that finance housing. I've worked for for-profit companies that finance housing. And in all of those circumstances, I've never gotten very far away from the affordable piece. I've served on boards of directors of housing developers, and I'm finally adding the last sector, and I'm looking over here at Clark and Abby. I'm finally on the board of a family foundation, so I'm finally getting the philanthropy link into my career. I mentioned this morning that the thing that got me to look at offsite construction was the fact that we saw the cost of housing going up faster than people's incomes. And it looked like there was nothing that was going to keep that gap from growing. And the presentation we had this morning really underscored that there just isn't any relief in sight. So it looked like offsite construction was at least worth exploring to find out if it might be one of the factors that we can bring into play to start to bring down the cost of producing housing. In 2019, when I stopped working full-time, we convened the Construction Revolution, which was a coalition of the willing. I honestly did the work as a volunteer, and I raised enough money so that I could hire an intern that could help me stand up the conference. So I didn't have to do all the scheduling and marketing materials and all that sort of thing. And that is that was the core of getting a lot of people in Minnesota to think about offsite construction. We were very lucky that we had an entrepreneur that was willing and ready to stand up a commercial modular, and that added to several very successful single-family modular contractors who had existed in the state for a number of years. And that created a critical mass for people saying, you know, we really should pay attention to this. We then moved on to do some further kinds of things. And Ryan, we're going to go into the lessons learned later, correct? This is just the intro.
Yeah, let's do the introduction, then we'll go lessons learned second round.
Okay, sounds good. So we will be looking at future activities to do, but what you'll hear when we get to lessons learned is some of the things that I think we're going to need to put in place to keep the momentum that we got started in 2019.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cindy Davis. I'm the Deputy Director for Building and Fire Regulations in the Building and Fire Regulations Division of the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. We are very fortunate in Virginia to have had this program up and running. I wish I could take credit for it, but all I have to do is keep it running. So it is over about 40 years old, and so our process relies primarily on third-party compliance assurance agencies to be our eyes and ears in the plants. I had used some time this morning during other panels just to text my staff just out of curiosity, because we are the official building official for the Offsite construction program in my office. And so any complaints, any problems do come to our office. As I said, over the last 5 years, how many complaints have we had? And so they sent me back the information that it's maybe 2 or 3 a year, and almost never has anything to do with the factory. It's always the on-site problems that are evolving. So it's 40 years, no complaints, and it works well for us. Anything that I can add to that, I'm happy to do so. I would note that last year we had approximately, I think about 5,500 fast units coming into Virginia. Sorry, Chris, if you're still here. And about almost 4,000 of those were commercial. About 1,500 were residential. So it raised revenue for us of approximately $405,000, which allows us to support a staff of about 2.5 people to run the offsite construction program and provide education. So works well. Thank you.
Great. Well, since it's late in the day, I guess I'll go very quickly, but all the way back to childhood in terms of what brings me here. I grew up in Orlando, Florida. When it was the fastest growing city in the country in the late '80s and '90s, and I think that experience gave me a sense of what cities can be, how cities can grow, how cities can transform. If you go to the house that I grew up in, it's unrecognizable. Somebody's added a second story to it. They've built these 2 giant and kind of ghastly McMansions across the street from it. Like it's for better and for worse. I grew up in a very rapidly transforming city and a very transformative time. And I think that as I started in my career, I wanted to open up those kinds of opportunities for transformation. So, in law school, I thought that, well, I'll go into land use law. That since that's what underpins kind of everything we're doing here, and sat in my first class and realized that the kind of minutia of navigating a zoning regulation on a project by project basis, when the underlying zoning rules themselves should be changed. When I hate the zoning rules that I'd be working on, that I would be helping projects navigate, I wanted to scrap them. I wanted to take it in a different direction. And so, coming out of law school, I had the opportunity to work on ADUs in Washington, D.C. We had just deregulated them, and I wanted to help bring some of the great work that had come out from the West Coast, cross-pollinate that across the country and try to get things off the ground there. And quickly ran into the basket of issues that folks have been talking about throughout the day, from financing to actual construction processes, to just trying to build an ecosystem from scratch where one doesn't exist. So in coming to HUD with the new administration, I have had the opportunity to join this organization that has a very long and very proud at times history of thinking big thoughts about housing. Going back to Operation Breakthrough once again. When we were in the 1969 moon landing era, that was a moon landing vision for housing. It was, how can we do something truly transformative? How can we solve this problem? Treating housing as though it's a solvable problem was something that I really love. And I think that, in this administration, with our current leadership at HUD, with Secretary Fudge, I think we have a group of leaders who embrace that idea that this is not just something that we're going to kick the can down the road on, that we have a real opportunity to solve some things, to change some things. And so we've been doing the best with the resources we have at HUD, and again, as I mentioned earlier, trying to work with our federal partners who've gotten a little more investment from the recent infrastructure bills. But again, it's ultimately about what the folks in this stage and in this room are doing, and how we at the federal level can provide support, can elevate great ideas, can remove barriers. And so just again the opportunity to participate in this effort and to help you all do these great things is what brings me here.
Thank you for the introductions. And so, yes, if you could just take a couple minutes to describe your story, and in particular, what are the lessons learned from your story, and what would you do differently, or what are you going to do moving forward? So we'll go in the same order. We'll go Blake, and then Mary, and then Cindy, and then Dan will wrap up. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think from a lessons learned standpoint, as I mentioned at the start, being the first municipality in the country to adopt the standard 1200 and 1205, a piece of advice that I would give to this group, if I'm sure all of you touch a municipality, if you're not working for one, you're working with one and deploying housing. And so one of the most important behind the scenes kind of narratives and roles that played with our mayor, our city council, and people who don't have kind of the technical expertise, as a lot of you in this room, was the narrative of social pressure and a need for greater housing supply in our community, and especially more deeply affordable housing, which offsite construction can help unlock. A quick overview, as if you're visiting, as you've gone around the city, if you have, you can probably feel the growth that's happening. I apologize for the road construction. The season's over in 2 weeks, and you've probably seen a lot of new housing coming online. So we're rapidly growing. We're a community of 200,000 that's on the rise. We've had the top downtown recovery since the pandemic, and we just recently published Housing SLC. It's a 5-year moderate income housing plan. And actually on Tuesday night, our city council approved the mayor's recommended Thriving in Place plan, which was a 2-year effort and our first attempt to study anti-displacement and gentrification in our community. We had researchers from UC Berkeley tell us that displacement pressures are high, they've never been worse, and there's no more affordable communities to move to within our community. So there's no driving till you qualify. We have a unique geography where we're bounded by mountain ranges. And the piece of advice that I'm getting at is those plans taught us that we have a 5,500 unit shortage of deeply affordable housing in Salt Lake City. And we are a growing city that wants a place for everyone who wants to live here to live comfortably and within their means. So we really framed the early adoption of those codes to these social pressures and community needs and framed it in that policy lens. We also are a community that struggles with being out of attainment with our air quality and our airshed with the EPA. And we also framed offsite construction and this type of development, or industrialized construction, as Ryan says sometimes, to more sustainable building practices. So that was a key narrative as well. And in addition to less time, more certain costs, which are really important in this moment, and higher quality and more affordable products. So we really tried to tie a nexus to offsite construction, helping be a way to plug that 5,500 unit gap. The project that I'm most excited about right now is in our community. It is a tiny home village. And a couple of years ago, our mayor said, I'm really taking this all the above approach to trying to solve our housing crisis. One of those includes smaller footprint homes that are built efficiently and quickly and affordably, and also would be deemed trauma-informed housing, where individuals who are experiencing chronic homelessness aren't in a group setting, but rather have a private place with a door and a kitchen and a bathroom. So there is a just under 40-acre piece of land on the city's west side that, of all things, was a former landfill. It was identified by a local group in our community, the Other Side Academy, and the mayor said, I want a tiny home village in our community. They came to us and said, we'll do it. I feel like it felt really crazy at the time. And 2 weeks ago, we signed a lease and a development agreement. And it's the most complex project I've ever been involved in. It is a former landfill that was zoned public lands that's now a form-based zone that required a public benefit analysis for $1 a year lease for 40 years, an 8-acre footprint that can grow to the 40 if benchmarks are met over time. It includes now in phase 1, they'll be putting in 60 modular units. They'll all be built in Salt Lake County, not in Salt Lake City proper. But I think it's just a really exciting time in project that you have 60 of these units being built off-site. When they're put in on-site, you'll have an inspection for the foundation and the utility hookup. And essentially what we were excited about in March of 2021 is now coming to fruition in a major project that is going to impact individuals in Salt Lake City that are chronically homeless. So it's a huge win for the city. It's a huge win for the community. On that site, not only will there be homes, there'll be community inn rentals. There will be on-site medical and dental services. There'll be a social enterprise building, as well as a community center and a bodega in a food desert. So I think it might be premature for some of the lessons learned, where next year I'll talk about what we would have done differently, as right now we're signing the agreements and everything is hunky-dory. But I would point out that, I see that project as really this exciting moment of those early initiatives, tapping into our community needs, telling the policymakers what they needed to hear to feel comfortable with the early adoption of those standards. In the state of Utah, off-site construction decisions are left up to the local code officials. So a piece of advice in Title 18, our building code in the city, when we adopted that, we put language in there that said, buildings not built on site in Salt Lake City would be built, inspected, and installed with the ICC MBI standards, 1200 and 1205, or its successor document. And that was kind of the key pivotal language in that document that I put out there, so you all know a lesson learned from us was the way of being able to codify applying those standards before they were officially codified through the ICC. So I put that out as a lesson learned, and also take your local municipal jurisdiction lessons learned to the state level. Our state legislature meets in January each year. We're not a full-time legislature, and there's now state legislation being proposed that mimics some of the language in the city ordinance. So I think that that's a great way to be able to help impact your local but also broader communities in unlocking all the opportunities that offsite construction present.
Thank you very much, Blake, and excited about the state of Utah as a whole moving to look for a modular code. It'll be interesting to see how that emerges over the coming years. Mary, would you please tell us your story and what are the top lessons you learned and you could share with the group?
Thank you. Again, the platform I'm coming to you from is one of several I work from, and that is this group called Construction Revolution. And I do want to say with a good deal of pride that in 2020, Construction Revolution was named as a finalist for the Ivory Prize. And I have to say, when we applied, they didn't quite know what to do with us because we weren't a manufacturer, so we really weren't doing construction. We weren't doing financing, so we weren't in that category. And while there were some elements of public policy, we really weren't doing that either. And I tell that story because intentionally, Construction Revolution has been cross-sector in our approach since day one. When we conceived our first convening, we said we want representatives of every single piece of the development process in the room from day one. Because unless that happens, we will not ever have offsite construction being a meaningful part of development in Minnesota. So with that said, I want to talk first about a lesson that I had to personally learn, and that is we had in Minnesota, going back to the 90s, so not quite as far as you, Cindy, but almost that far, a really pretty healthy and supportive environment from our state Department of Labor and Industry. They adopted something called the International Industrialized Building Commission approach to modular construction, which covered panelized construction and full volumetric modular. And I won't go into the details, but it was designed at that time to do a really very good job of serving single-family residential modular manufacturers. So we're talking about properties that fall underneath the residential building code and factories that are producing largely single-family housing. And at that scale and within that building code setting, it frankly really did a pretty darn good job. So the state level agency was doing all of the factory inspections, doing all the sign-offs on the quality assurance plans for the factories, as well as reviewing all of the standard model plans and doing the ongoing inspections. And there was a pretty good intersection with local building code officials because frankly, you were talking about single family homes. So as we waltzed into this, one of the things we patted ourselves on the back for in 2019 was, hey, we've got this really advanced, really modular friendly building code. Well, what we learned very quickly, and you heard Justin's horror story this morning, was that that same level of knowledge and support at our State Department of Labor and Industry really could not handle the much more complex issues of commercial construction, where the order of magnitude of the issues you're trying to solve, whether it's structural issues, whether it's fire suppression, all of those things are really on a different planet in terms of the complexity. So we had a well-established group that was doing a good job that suddenly was hit with a commercial manufacturer, and they tried their best, and frankly, they just couldn't do it. And we ended up, similar, Justin, to your story, of almost a year in terms of getting the building permits and being told to, well, go ahead and start construction without the permit in the factory, and we'll catch up with you when we get there. And I don't have to tell you that that may or may not have been a great idea, but that building is now built, and everybody came out. But that certainly is one of the lessons learned. And I would say also that the business model for a lot of single-family, smaller manufacturers comes out of the manufactured housing world. A lot of them use what they call a dealer structure, which is where the manufacturer teams up with small home builders who see modular housing as a way to expand the number of homes that they can build in a given year. And that frankly works out pretty well for the manufacturer because it's the home builder that does all the interface with the borrower. They help select the lot, they help with the financing, they do all of the on-site construction, and the manufacturer really just, interacts with the dealer, and things really work out pretty successfully. It's a very different business model, and you heard a little bit about this from Eric Schaefer, that really it's a question of who is your customer, who is willing to sign that contract, who is willing to stand up and say, we are going to do this development with modular construction, and whether that's the developer, whether that's a municipality, there needs to be a very different sell into the marketplace that also needs to bring all those players together of the developer, the designer, the general contractor. And I'm honestly, Justin, fascinated by the fact that you're using modules from multiple manufacturers, because that's a little bit out of the page book of this dealer network thing, where it's really it's an interesting thing for me to think more about. Some of the other things that we did as the early days of construction revolution that I think were a good idea. One, we developed an action plan. We had 4 things that we said we needed to do, and we did all 4 of them. One was to get a little bit of a pointing bonus for modular construction with the State Housing Finance Agency. Another was to do classes for local building officials on what modular is. Another was to really share that action plan with affordable housing developers. So we did a pretty good job, and we followed it up in 2021 by offering not a big convening, but we offered an online Offsite accelerator course, which was developed by ModX in consultation with us. And we had a 6-week class where we had the ability to bring 25 young people from across the development spectrum, and they included developers, they included lenders, they included architects, they included general contractors. And in 4 2-hour classes, they got to learn the basics of what offsite construction and industrialized construction means and what it would take. And then we followed that up with 2 workshops. First workshop was for single-family projects. The second was for multifamily projects. And so any of the students could bring a project that they were working on, and we would workshop that project live with the rest of the students. And what I'm probably most proud of is that the project I talked to you about this morning was workshopped in that Offsite Accelerator course. And I will tell you that if we hadn't workshopped it, they would never have made the individual sites available at the very first part of searching for developer teams to go and walk the sites. And one of the things that came back, they may sound like a small thing, but I can remember Ivan saying, you gotta remember that the crane has gotta be able to lift the boxes over the trees and the power lines if you're gonna use a particular site. So if you're working in a city, Blake, and you get to the point where you're doing that, it is a non-trivial issue to figure out how to deal with the trees and the power lines. And what happened was, out of that first round of a lot of these developers going and walking the site, or contractors going walking the site, they said to the PHA, sites A, B, C, and D aren't going to work. And it saved us time in the long run by eliminating some of those sites that were just not buildable for modular. So those are the plus side. There are a couple of other things besides the building code that I want to mention. If I had to do it all over again, I'd raise a little bit more money to hire, if nothing else, a good intern to keep the idea of construction revolution and the action plan in front of people. As we developed it, I try to do it on a volunteer basis, and it really just isn't enough. There are too many issues. There are too many audiences that need to be kept up to date on the changes in offsite construction, bringing the great information that you've all shared today back to your local market. It takes somebody, it takes time, it takes energy, and to have that continuity, even if it's not a big expenditure, I think is an important one. And finally, and this is thanks to our California panel and also listening to Eric again, despite my background, our link to affordable housing from the beginning was really pretty weak. And that had something to do with the fact that we had manufacturers that said, you know, we're happy to do affordable, but that's not going to be our whole business. And when I went to my affordable housing colleagues who have been developing affordable housing for a long time, I found out just truly how risk averse they are. They're managing so many variables, and the very scarce affordable housing dollars are so competitive. 4 to 5 times as many applications for tax credits or for tax exempt bonds as there are projects that will get them, that they do not want to do anything that they think will risk having their project not get their funding. Getting the funding is paramount, and everything else is secondary. So that was a lesson learned for me. I thought my colleagues, who I knew well, would flock to this idea, and without any other incentive, like actual set aside of dollars or an actual sponsorship of projects by local communities that said we want it to be modular. I don't see the push for innovation coming from the affordable housing developer side.
Thank you. Wonderful lessons, Mary. Thank you very much. And Cindy, been doing this a long time. Do you have some lessons to share with us from Virginia? Yeah.
So I would say if there are any lessons that I have learned, I am absolutely clear on one thing, and that is our program from a statewide perspective would not be successful without the General Assembly passing the law it did. And I want to read just a brief statement that is within that law, because it says, "It is further the policy of the Commonwealth to minimize the unique problems presented by a lack of uniform standards and inspection procedures affecting the mass production of housing, and to hereby declare its intention to, 1, encourage the reduction of construction costs, and 2, make housing more feasible for all residents of the Commonwealth." So without that law that undermines the entire program, we would, I am sure, be having the same conversations that many unique individual municipalities are having. That law in Virginia makes it very clear to all of the local jurisdictions, also within that law, and I don't want to read the whole thing, but it says if it bears a seal from the Commonwealth of Virginia that indicates compliance with all of the construction standards, which in the case of currently, it's the 2018 International Residential Code or International Building Code. Without the seal from with the seal of the Commonwealth of Virginia, it shall be deemed to be acceptable in all municipalities. So from a statewide perspective, that is really what supports the whole entire program. I would say, additionally, a couple of other lessons learned in making that program successful is the importance of collaborating with a lot of different stakeholders. When we develop the regulations to go along with that law, we do it on a 3-year cycle, much like the building code. And that cycle includes the ability to have a number of meetings with all of our stakeholders. We're very fortunate to have MBI as a strong partner in Virginia, and they are always welcome to the table to talk to us about challenges they are facing in the industry. The building officials are at the table, the fire officials are at the table, other state agencies, hotels, motels, B&Bs, anybody that could possibly be affected by changes in the regulations to the industrialized building standards in Virginia. They're in the room, they're at the table. We have a series of meetings in person, and they are all welcome. We also have an online system to allow them to submit public comments anytime they want. So the collaboration and the importance of bringing all the stakeholders together, I think, is also key. And then I think the final lesson learned for us is, and we've heard it said many times today, is the importance of education. So we try to make our staff available for speaking events, for League of Cities events, for local chapter meetings, for building officials. We have a PowerPoint program that we put together on what the importance is to to identify how to collaborate and the difference between the on-site and the off-site. And we've done that by putting pointers to the industrialized regulations in the building code and pointers to the building code in the industrialized building regulations so that everybody knows exactly what their responsibilities are. And I think, in general, the only other thing I wanted to say is Virginia focuses very hard on affordability. You know, our tagline is focus on affordability, and the inspectors in Virginia are all required to be certified, and they're all required to go through our core module training program. And one of the tenets of that program is that in Virginia, we call it the Virginia way. Try to figure out a way to say yes before you say no. And so that premise underscores everything that we do on affordability, not just in offsite construction, but also the building code, the existing building code, and that it has to be safe at the least possible cost. And that's a hard balance to maintain, but we think we do a pretty good job. And I'm actually going to, there was a slide up there earlier today that I hope I can get, because it was, I think, the percentage of households that are priced out of a home. And I think it was Virginia and Arkansas that were the two lowest. So I think that focus on affordability is working in Virginia. And I'm excited to see how we can improve our program with some of the innovative partnerships that we have coming up with some grant opportunities to maybe look at the ability to do product approval as opposed to individual volumetric approval, and open to new technologies along the way. So stay tuned. Thank you.
You also have an amazing housing finance agency in Virginia.
We do.
Thank you, Cindy. It's amazing to see a place that's been doing this for 40 years now trying to innovate continuously. What's the next step? What other standard can we do? How can we make this easier? How can we allow for more affordable housing via industrialized means? So thank you, Cindy, for being an example. We're going to end a little bit early to give enough time to close out the entire conference, but I wanted to have Dan, if you had any last words, if you wanted to summarize anything from this panel about what you've been hearing also through the day, and how you think HUD is going to be interfacing with this in the future as a department.
Yeah, no, I think that this panel is an illustration of the extent to which people are policy. You know, I think if you talk about HUD as an institution, you know, the times when we've been at our most innovative, the times when we've been pushing things in new directions have really been because, you know, like Mary or like Cindy have done, you know, they've said, hey, let's think about how we're doing this. Let's think about innovation here. Let's think about new approaches, because, you know, I think just like any large organization, you know, you have this tendency towards stasis, towards, you know, doing things, you know, by the book, towards doing things in a formulaic way. But I will say that, you know, during my brief time here at HUD, that, you know, I have seen folks who've been there for decades who really, you know, are just as fresh-eyed and are just as excited to see, you know, new ideas and new approaches, you know, as, you know, they may have been when they first arrived decades ago. You know, we've got you know, a long time, you know, HUD colleague Kofi right here in the middle of the room, who's, you know, really you know, one of the folks at HUD who's, you know, bringing that institutional knowledge and institutional memory. And so I think that for folks who have new ideas, you know, who are trying to take new approaches, who are, you know, we get a lot of input from folks who, you know, individual builders or manufacturers who have new ideas and they want to talk to HUD and say, hey, you know, here's my great new process, my great new widget. And we always like to hear about that. That's always fun for us, but it really is about building those community level collaborations. You know, it's not coming to us with the new widget, with the new manufacturing process. It's saying, hey, we've connected with our city, with our county, with our state. We've built this this consortium effort that, you know, is thinking about the labor side of things, that's thinking about workforce training, that's thinking about all of the pieces. And, you know, here is this great idea. our community wants to support it with their HUD dollars. We just want to, walk HUD through how this fits within, HUD's existing rubrics and matrices. So I think that's the best way to come to us if you have a great idea, is build that local support for it first, and then talk to us about how we can help move things, through the building at HUD and ultimately get those resources in your way.
Thank you very much, Dan and the panel. Let's give them a hand for sharing their knowledge today. I'm going to hand this back over to Abby, but I wanted to again thank them and thank everyone for coming to this. I was looking at Rick up on the stand earlier from Autovol and thought he's been doing this for 40 years and still believes in it. And so I think we all should as well. Let's take that example and take up the banner for addressing affordable housing through offsite construction. This has a bright future, and if we can continue to work together as people to try and address this and overcoming the regulation challenges, the policy challenges, the finance challenges, and of course innovating in the technology for design and construction, I think we can. I invite you to meet those that were on the panels here at the end of the day. Let's exchange cards and continue this conversation. Again, thank you, Ivory Innovations, for being a wonderful host today.